All right, hello everybody. It is Monday, October the 9th. It's Canadian Thanksgiving, and I'm coming at you live from Canada, Canadian Thanksgiving time. I have to admit, it's a kind of a weird vibe today for a number of reasons. I'm not going to get too into it, but I just want to acknowledge that there's a bunch of the Israel-Palestine conflict has flared up, first of all. And we have the Mars square Pluto, and I'm not here to do any political commentary on it one way or another, but it is we're heading into eclipse season with a Mars square Pluto and a Venus opposite Saturn, which are difficult aspects, and it's sort of indicative of some of the transits to have a kind of a blow up like this with Mars square Pluto, as unfortunate as it may be. There's some, I'm not gonna, but I don't want to spend too much time on the current events side of things right now. What I wanted to do, what I have in mind with this video is that I laid out a bunch of tarot cards before this to sort of guide me along with what I was going to say. And there are certain things that I've been considering talking about, but I've been kind of holding off on. And I think that my tarot cards have kind of led me to point me in the direction of talking about some things today in this video. But before I do that, I would just like to... there's one thing about my last video that I recorded is that I got some comments about a certain point that I was making. And I think maybe even saying, like, this is the whole thing, is that my last video, I was basically doing a kind of a free association riff based on watching, James Blake talk about using the word fixing in terms of mental health, and then that giving me a strong association to the support group that I used to do. And this support group was, I don't know, when did we get started with this? It was like 2016 or 2017 or something like that, right? And we carried on this group with different facilitators over a few different years. And I had this, it's like one of those things where I think, like, sometimes when, women might explain or might talk about how they really don't like the whole mansplaining thing, it's like by talking about the thing you don't like, it like invites somebody to be like, I think men should be able to explain things, right? Without being kind of not really understanding the context of it. And what I was trying to say about like the point of bringing that up is that I do believe that the whole topic of having this attitude of problem solving and fixing does go with Virgo, and does maybe go with part of the reason why Venus is in detriment to Virgo, but that doesn't necessarily mean that taking an attitude of problem solving or fixing is necessarily bad in like an absolute sense. And actually, it's one of these things that if you take any position like that and make it absolute, where you say, what do you mean nobody's ever supposed to solve their problems? Nobody's ever supposed to fix anything? It's like, that would be absolutely ridiculous. And I would say that, like, in certain situations, it may actually be a very good idea to fix things, right? And that instead of taking what my video was about to be like, my point is to be like, oh no, you guys, look out, we're gonna have Venus and Virgo, so watch out, you're gonna want to fix stuff when you shouldn't, so nobody try to, that's not what I'm saying, but rather to use these kinds of things to sort of see that there's certain dynamics in play. And you could take what I said and you could like flip it and say like, well, maybe there may be certain sort of situations where a person doesn't want somebody to play problem solver for them, but there may be actual problems that could be solved and where it would be appropriate, you don't treat a person like they're a broken dishwasher. But if you have a broken dishwasher, maybe you should fix your broken, it's like, or if you have your car's broken down, you may feel like your car has a soul and a spirit, but it doesn't mean you don't, if you have a flat tire, you change your flat tire. If you have a broken radiator, you fix your broken radiator. To take an absolute position against fixing things is ridiculous, okay? So I just wanted to clear that up, that it's not, that wasn't my point, in case anybody thought that's what direction I was going in. And also, just to clarify, that there's something about that specific group where the idea of having a rule that nobody's going to be doing fixing or problems. I mean, it's more of like a guideline, right? But the general attitude is that, like, kind of the point is that this is something, I didn't invent this rule myself. There's somebody else who is trained at doing support groups or these sort of sharing circles. Like, that is something that is autonomous from me. Like, people do these kind of groups all the time, and whether or not my opinion about it, like, it's enough that people in their own position would feel the need to make those rules based on their own circumstances and all this kind of stuff, and that you know, and whether that's applicable to anything going on in your life or whatever situation that's happening in the present moment, that's up for you to figure out if that's applicable or not, right? I mean, I'm taking some classes right now, and taking a class is not the same thing as being in a support group, right? But if somebody's like, in the context of, like, if somebody's doing an astrology Zoom meeting support where you're pitching it as a support group, then it may be relevant. But if you're doing some other thing, it may not be relevant, right? So I just want to get that out of the way first, right? Now, the thing is, though, is that there's something about the Venus opposite Saturn thing about fixing and problem solving, that, and or the thing about, like, holding off on doing that, or the idea of, like, having what I would say boundaries, right? And I am a little bit, you know, I back in the summer I was making a bunch of videos, and one of the things that I did with yeah, you know, I was talking about Saturn and Pisces and some aspects to Saturn and Pisces, is that I made a video that was like, respect the boundaries. And it either, like, it didn't get very many clicks, or I kind of felt that, like, it didn't go, like, something about putting that in the title is that, you know, I think people don't like the idea of being told what to do, and they don't like being told to respect boundaries, even if it may be a good idea. But again, maybe context is important, right? But I was thinking about this idea of boundaries, in terms of, and also not just boundaries, but with Pluto, there's certain things, like things that are kept secret, things that are kept hidden, and that there's something about this whole dynamic where, you know, instead, like, Virgo can be a bit of a perfectionist, right? And I was thinking, the kind of videos I've been making recently, that rather than trying to have a very clean and neat kind of idea of what I'm doing in each video and trying to be perfect about it, what if instead I would just be a little bit more free and a little bit more loose, and kind of explore where things go as I make the video, and if I say things accidentally that, you know, rather than it being like, oh, I messed up my video because I said the wrong thing, maybe it's the wrong thing that actually has some kind of truth in it, or it's like the weird thing that's slipping out that shouldn't be there actually says more than what my, you know, my ego, which wants to control the situation and put everything, like, this is the message of the video, and this is the point that it was really, like, or, you know, like the whole thing about fixing, like, maybe I do have this kind of attitude that, like, of not wanting to be fixed, and then it's actually the opposite. Maybe it's a great time to fix, you know, but like that, and it could be like, if you take things and flip them and look at them the opposite way, then it could be actually be valuable, and that's kind of like the upside down, right? The underworld of Pluto, maybe, right? So whatever, there's certain things that I wanted to get into with this video in terms of this kind of like boundaries and secrets and stuff like that, and I mean, I don't want to get into too much of a bummer, right? With all this, like, because it is kind of like some heavy transits that are maybe a bit more difficult right now, and some heavier material. Where, like, okay, I'll just get into it. It does relate to the whole fact that it's Canadian Thanksgiving, and I realize that around holidays like Thanksgiving, there's a certain kind of thing going on in the collective where a lot of people may have to deal with family and that there's obviously there can be different types of friction with family members, different kinds of family feuds, or maybe, you have to like sit at the table with your uncle who's got like some different political point of view, and your family fights and all this kind of stuff. And again, I don't want to like wallow in problems and all this kind of stuff, but like, for better or for worse, one thing that I haven't had to deal with very much in recent years is any of this, dealing with family beyond my immediate mother and sister. Because for one thing, there's different factors. The fact that certain grandparents have passed away, but there's this thing going on where my mother is not on speaking terms with any of her family anymore, and that my father, this is like it's a bit of a different story, but both on my grandparents' side of my father's family are both passed away, and for a lot of that side of the family's passed away, and the ones that survive, again, for what it's a bit, I don't want to get into all the family stuff, but for whatever reason, we're not as like friendly with them as we could be, right? And like there's this kind of this, and like I have this whole thing about talking about, I don't want to be wallowing in like being lonely or whatever, but I'm just want to talk about the astrological dynamic with Venus opposite Saturn, Mars opposite Pluto, and the actual situation that I'm in. And it's not just being like, okay, I'm in my hometown, which I feel lonely about because at one point in time I had friends that I used to hang out with in this town. I don't have those friends anymore, or the people that I am on sort of good terms with, we don't really talk. And I'm not really even that fussed about it, because I'm kind of like, it's been a long time since high school, and I don't really, if it's not natural or organic to just keep it up with your high school friends, whatever, but still, I would rather maybe live somewhere else, right? But I'm here with my mother, I'm here with my sister, without many friends, and also on Thanksgiving, we don't have any family contact with the family on Thanksgiving, right? And there's this whole thing, though, about, there's certain things I wanted to get into this video, and specifically there's one issue that I have kept secret. Or at least, I've told some people about this privately, but I've never really just talked about it in a public video like this. And I don't even know if my relatives, they probably don't watch these videos. So the main thing which is awkward about this, let me just tell you about it, because I think this goes with Pluto dynamics and Mars Pluto, is that when my parents were trying to conceive children, they had a hard time with it. Right? And what ended up happening was they found out that my dad had fertility issues, in that he wasn't producing enough sperm, and so my mother had to go to a sperm donor for both me and my sister. And so the thing about this is that me and my sister were never biologically related to my dad, and actually me and my sister are from different sperm donors, so we're only biologically related through my mom. And yet this was kept secret from me and my sister up until the point where I was, let's say 21 years old, 22 years old, something like that. And so that's kind of a reality shaking thing, right? Where you have a picture of your life as a person in reality, and you're told this story that these are your parents and that you are related to these people, and then you find out one of them you're not even related to, right? And now the thing about this is, for me, I loved my dad very much, and he was a big influence on me, but it's also kind of weird that from a genetic point of view, actual biological point of view, I don't have any connection to him at all, but he is the guy who raised me, and he did have a big influence on me, right? And my dad, unfortunately, passed away in 2013, which was over 10 years ago now. He died of a heart attack in the summer of 2013. and there's a lot of grief around it. And this goes to my whole thing of like why I talk about like the situation that I don't like, the situation I'm in. I don't like. It's not just because I don't like feeling like I'm, like I'm an adult. I'm 36 years old. I'm going to turn 37 soon. But in this situation, living with my mom and my sister, I feel kind of infantile, right? But it's not just that. It's that my dad is missing. My dad's out of the situation. I live with two women, my mother and my sister, and I'm an adult male. And when my dad was my age, he was doing all this sort of the stuff you would expect an adult to do, and yet I feel like an incapacitated child or something. But then not just that, is that there's this sort of like permeating kind of atmosphere of grief, the loss of the husband, the loss of the father, and also the fact that I'm not even related to, well, I mean, but not just that, but the fact, okay, this is what I'm trying to get in with the whole thing about problem solving and fixing and boundaries, is that a while ago, I made a video and I posted a link to this great lecture from Malidoma Some. Now, Malidoma Some is an African guy. I mean, I don't know what the right word is, because, they say shamanism is like, it's something that it comes from Siberia, right? But he kind of teaches kind of African shamanism. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago in the midst of the COVID pandemic. But before COVID happened, I got a chance to see Malidoma Some live in person. I got to be there in the room and look the guy in the face and hear him talk, and it was really cool, right? But the thing is, in this video, or in this lecture, where I think it's a great lecture, and I recommend everybody listen to it. At the end of it, Malidoma Some is being asked questions from the audience, and one of the guys in the audience is bringing up the whole thing, because, I mean, it's in the context of the men's movement, the mythopoetic men's movement, and that Malidoma Some was friends with James Hillman. And there's some recordings where Malidoma Some and Hillman and Michael Mead are all talking together. I recommend those as well. But in this situation, he's talking to groups of men, right? And I think it's also important to consider the context of this, is that this is in the 90s, and I feel like we're in a bit of a different climate these days, because I realized that there used to be this kind of like battle of the sexes almost, right? Where you had men and women, and you had this whole thing about like angry feminists who hate men and the gender wars or something. And then, but more recently, there's this stuff about transgender issues that have kind of eclipsed, we're in eclipse season. It's kind of eclipsed that part of it, right? And so it's kind of interesting listening to people talking about this in the 90s, because it would you just get the impression that it would be a different conversation if people were talking about this now, right? But I think that even like there's a sort of pretense that like the transgender thing sort of transcends the gender binary, and now we don't have to talk about gender binaries anymore and all this kind of stuff. And so I've been kind of avoiding this, because it feels like a kind of an awkward, because I don't to be honest, like, what can I say? I don't want to like come off as being like transphobic or stuff like that. I want to support trans people, and I don't want to like join Jordan Peterson's side or anything like this, even though like the context of these Jungian men's groups and all this, right? But there's something in this whole issue where the guy asking Malidoma a question was like talking about the women's problems and men's problems, and Malidoma Some was giving the advice that women have there's a whole set of problems that women have to deal with, and that it's not really a man's place to try to go in there and to try to solve the problem for the woman, right? And so this is kind of like, it kind of creates a situation where you have these men's groups and then you have women's groups, and that to split people off into these different things, and not to, and I mean, I mean, if you look at the situation, I'm just saying that, like, as terms of like a family situation where you've got a woman whose husband has died, and obviously with Thanksgiving, you're the missing family member, the missing father, the missing husband, and also the fact that the rest of the family is out of the picture too. It can feel really kind of crappy and lonely. But the whole thing is that, from as being the son in the picture, it's not like that I'm like, the son, being a son in this situation, there's not really a hell of a lot I can do about this, right? That, like, of course, if somebody is dealing with this from the position of grief and loss and stuff like that, that you've alienated yourself from your own family, your partner is dead, then you don't want to lose your children as well. But it's not it's not my job as a son to, you know what I mean? I can't feel that's why it's this whole thing about the gross Oedipal complex. I don't want to be goddamn Oedipus Rex and either marry my mother or play father to my sister. That's not, like, this, no, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't work. No, thank you. Okay? So, but it's like this thing that, like, I'm trying to try to, like, it's not it could just be like, I don't know if this is a family thing or if it's a male-female thing, but I kind of feel like I do my thing where I read books and I, do try to work on myself. But in the situation with a grieving widow mother and a whatever my sister's got, like, I feel like there's nothing I can really do about this, right? And this is the kind of thing where you could see, even if you can sort of like analyze where things might be off, or you think you have some sort of insight into the situation, it feels really just like, like helpless, because it's like, I could have all sorts of insights about like what might help things, but it's not my place as a man to go in and try to like solve the grief of another person. And when you're so wrapped up in the dynamic that that's your mother or that's your sister, and the fact that it's not just as simple as being just about the grief of the missing father, that there's also all this other stuff going on where we're completely alienated from the rest of our families, our extended families, and we're completely alienated. At least I'm alienated from my friends to some extent. I mean, like that could be something I could work on. You know what I'm saying? Is that we're in there's this Venus opposite Saturn and Mars opposite Pluto. Is that there's all this stuff that maybe it's just better not to get into, right? But at the same time, I'm looking at the eclipses that are happening and what this eclipse cycle means, especially with the eclipses being in the square to Pluto, and Pluto having to do with secrets and hidden stuff and taboos and stuff that's like, there's something about the Mars square Pluto which, like, pardon my language, but feels a little bit crazy to me, in the sense that, like, like, there's like these energies going around that I don't want to identify with. I don't want to say that this is me being my extent, but it's like, with this influence of the Mars Pluto energy, I feel like if I'm not careful with what I say, I could say things that come off in a way that are really crazy, or that there's this kind of underlying, like, passive aggressive, manipulative, or like being like, I'm really angry, but I'm supposed to not show it, so I'm just going to try to be happy and be normal, and then that thing that you can't talk about is like, it's like the thing, it's like the grit, like the there's something, there could be good though, there's the riches of Pluto that is kind of like the sand that gets into the oyster that makes the pearl, right? So that there could be something like beneficial about Pluto, but there's this sort of like irritating factor, and you want to just be like, well, okay, we're not going to touch all these sensitive areas, we're not going to deal with all the grief, but there's still just feeling really bothered by it, and then it coming out in weird ways, right? And there's something about this whole thing about, like, I think that Pluto, there's also, I have to, while I'm talking about this stuff, and I've made a video where I've sort of openly talked about this fact that I'm a sperm donor child. There's another side of this which I am uncomfortable with, but I'm going to use this video to talk about it. Hopefully you guys don't mind. Is that the idea? Isn't it a little bit disturbing to consider that not only, like, okay, there's this thing about Pluto, which I feel has to do with this principle of like force, right? And I mean, you could relate it to the Strength tarot card, where the person is like, you know, the lady is like prying open the mouth of the lion or something like this. But there's a sort of like there's also like the force. It's a spiritual principle, the force that moves things, but also like when you have to do things by force, right? Like imagine two people who are married, who want to have children, but they are unable to. And so you're not going to give up. We're going to have kids regardless. If nature doesn't want to have kids, we'll find a way. And that way is essentially getting random strangers to look at dirty magazines, jerk off into a turkey baster, and then rather than having kids that are born in an act of loving copulation, we are going to very mechanically inseminate people as if they are like cattle. You know what I mean? Like how cattle don't have sex anymore. We're just going to stick a turkey baster and then in a very mechanical, cold, unloving way just knock somebody up and then have kids. And then there's this whole thing about like, well, I'm looking at like, there's all this stuff about like using different techniques to process birth trauma. And it's like the whole pretense of me being born is people whose bodies were not letting them have kids. And so they're going to do it in the most artificial, mechanical way. And then, oh, you know, I don't know if this is a direct causation. If I have problems, it's because I was created in this weird, unnatural way. But there's also this I mean, I don't want to reduce it down to being just as simple as that. But there's certain other dynamics where, like I said too, don't get me wrong, I really loved my dad, the guy who raised me, and he's had such an influence in my life. But I was listening to another interview. There's this guy, what's his name? Tyson. There's this guy named, I think his name is Tyson something. There's a guy who's like a Maori Islander. I was listening to an interview with him at one point in time. You know, it was it was like maybe a year ago now or something that I heard this interview. So it's not very fresh, but so maybe I shouldn't credit him. But he was talking about this thing about like, from like the indigenous perspective, right? I can probably find it and link it here, and I don't know if I can find exactly what he said, but what I remember anyways is he was like from a certain rational scientific point of view, you could say that you've got a family where, you know, the father isn't biologically the father, and you've got kids, but, you know, like there's no real scientific reason why that should really be that big of a problem, right? But he's saying from an Aboriginal point of view, if you were to say to an Aboriginal person that you've got a bunch of kids who are being raised by a person who is not biologically related to them at all, and yet you're basically telling these kids a lie and saying that you are biologically related to this person, and then, but there's like there's this sense of the actual truth of things, right? That at a cellular genetic level, you know it's not true that this person is your father, and yet the pretense is that he is, and there's some sort of thing, there's a kind of a disconnect with like maybe also with that whole side of the family where something is off, and yet you've never been told this. This is where Pluto comes in, right? There's some kind of like, the Pluto is like getting down to looking under a microscope, or getting your genes analyzed and looking at the actual truth, the actual material genetic truth of things, and then being like, so the actual truth is this, and yet you're raising your kids under a false pretense, and there's not, you know, you don't think there's going to be any problem that comes out of that. You know, it doesn't, like, and it's also, I mean, there's this whole thing about like overpopulation, and I don't really know where to get in with that though, because people like Elon Musk thinks we really ought to be having lots of kids, right? Even though the population is like, I don't know, maybe that's another direction you can go with it, right? But this is like, I don't know if I'm going too far with this video, but these are some ideas that I have had that I've been holding on, and this is like, rather, I'm not going to bring this up with my family because I don't really know if there's a point in it, right? But I'm making this as putting this in a video to tell you guys about it, anyways. And but yeah, this is kind of the thing. Like when you're actually dealing with your family, like what can you actually do about this situation, right? I don't know. And there's this, I mean, this whole thing about individuation, right? In being, and like, maybe the best thing to do is to, whatever, like, get my own independent life, get my own, but it's like, I don't know. That's, like, I think that I don't disagree with this idea of being, like, an independent adult and being able to support myself and all this, but I'm not really, I have to admit, I don't know, the cost of living is really expensive, and I have how long is it going to be before my mom passes away and I just inherit this house because my dad isn't alive anymore, right? If I actually deal with the situation that I'm giving, it makes a lot of sense just to hang out, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but eventually, like, I could either be some poor person who's living off of subsidized government housing, fighting for scraps, in this really expensive, weird economic situation, or I could it's like, I have to admit, I'm privileged, right? I'm in a privileged position, although, because I have a big house that I'm going to inherit, and I'm in a neighborhood where, it's people drive luxury cars around and there aren't any homeless people, and it's like I'm sitting in the privileged lap of luxury, and I really shouldn't complain, right? But then on the other hand, my hope is not just social alienation from my friends, it's my family is completely alienated. My family is completely grieving. And as a young, or whatever, as the son, as the brother in this situation, there's not really a hell of a lot I can do. So in a way, it just feels like I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but it feels a little bit hopeless, or it feels a little bit helpless, because like I can't do anything to make my mother feel better, except for just being like, well, I'll stay here living with you so you don't feel lonely. But it doesn't fix the fact that my dad died now, did it? Right? It doesn't, or like, there's this, it's, right? Like, this is the situation we're in, right? And so, like, I think that this kind of thing with, like, the Malidoma Some thing is kind of like, and the idea of the mythopoetic men's movement is that as a male, there's not really much, I can't really solve my sister's psychological issues as her male brother. I can't solve my mother's, issues. But yeah, I still have to live with it. I still have to put up with it, right? So there's this kind of thing about not fixing is you can just sort of like have some boundaries and be like, your problem is not my problem to go in and try to problem solve. And, like, whether my dad meant a lot to me, even though I wasn't biologically related to him. And, sometimes I deal with the grief in my own way, but I'm okay with it. But it's like nonetheless, there's this sort of thing, like, what I'm trying to say about, like, this whole, it's like, I don't know. My mom doesn't even like watching TV shows with anything to do with, like, she likes murder mysteries, but she doesn't like watching anything that has dark and heavy themes that remind her of the things that are going on. But it's like, the whole thing is like, well, okay, like, I maybe I can accept, a person doesn't feel like watching this or that movie, and that's their choice. They don't have to, right? And I don't even know, I don't want to necessarily maybe watch all the movies that I watch with my family, right? But at least, the way my personality works is that there's something in the dark side of things, the shadowy side of things, that is like a source of regeneration. It's like to go to the place that you're uncomfortable with and to feel those uncomfortable feelings. It's not, the point isn't to just be wallowing in misery, but it actually, you process stuff, or you I don't know, maybe it's like healing, right? But if you're in this thing where there's this other side of it where you're like, if you don't, it's like, if you don't want to feel the feelings, they're not just, it doesn't seem like they just go away by avoiding them, right? I mean, shouldn't that be obvious? But I'm kind of like, I just feel like I'm kind of running up against this thing where I'm like, I'm motivated to read a lot of books, and I'm motivated to learn a lot of things. But a lot of it is just, I realize that a lot of it has to do is that I have certain friction in my point of view and how I relate to things versus my mother and my sister. And it's sort of like, and I realize that, the individuation, like if I just didn't have to deal with my mother and sister, then it would be like, that solves most of the problem, because this is just one person who has one point of view, who has one kind of problem. And by trying, like, what's the point in trying to, like, I'm going to read all the psychology books in the world so I can understand it, and yet, I can't do fucking shit all. It doesn't matter. If I can read, I can have the most detailed psychological understanding of what the problem is, but I can't do that for my mom, I can't do that for my sister, right? But then, at the same time, it's like, literally, if I move out, then we're probably going to have to sell the house, because we can't, like being able to afford living in this situation is like having a bunch of people pooling their efforts together to live together. But if everybody's just like, we're all hyper individuals, and our family just needs to be destroyed because it's no good, we're all just going to be super individual people who have no connection to family, we're all just going to be, then what do you put the mom in an old folks home, and then and then the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that, I had this mental health crisis, a couple years before my dad died, right? And I basically dropped out from having a normal job, right? And I saw in the news that if you take around the time when I had that mental health crisis, and you look at, I was living in Vancouver, I was being an independent young man, working a full-time job, paying rent in an expensive city, getting by, and, I didn't want to, I knew it would be better to just keep working in that job and doing this stuff, but there's something, I just broke down and I couldn't do it, and, one of the things that really bothered me, for one thing, I had a bunch of friends move away, and the friends that I did have in the area, I was just, whatever, I was not doing very well with my own loneliness, and, this whole stuff, I had a psychotic break and all this kind of stuff, but one of the things that really just got under my skin was that I was living really close to the downtown east side in Vancouver, and I see how so many young creative people get sucked into this thing of addiction and drug use, and there's a sort of thing of looking at the people on the street who are in a really bad situation doing crack and meth and heroin and all that stuff as just being others, right? But then when you're in the situation where your own demons are really getting at you, and you don't know, I don't know what to say about it. Feeling I felt sympathy or compassion, or I didn't feel like I was so different from these people. Or you see people walking around just freaking out on the streets, like screaming at their, and it's like, man, how far away am I from just being that guy if I stay in this situation, right? And there's I was reading Dostoevsky's The Idiot, and there's this great line in Dostoevsky's The Idiot where he was talking about the healing, to go back to the village, to leave the city, go to the village, and you're to be healed by the fresh village air, right? To get out of the situation where there's all this really awful stuff at Maine and Hastings, and it's I have to, I don't know, I don't want to play it up went through all this trauma, but it was just the environment that was around me. I just felt like I had to get out of there, right? And what I'm trying to say now is that to be an independent person, it's okay, so what am I going to do? Am I going to just stay in my hometown and move and be okay, well, I'm going to move 4 kilometers away from my mom's house in the same shitty, well, it's not really that bad, but like I'm just going to move what am I going to do? I'm going to get an apartment in the same town as my family, so I basically just live the same life, but I'm not stuck in the same house as them. Or else I go and live in the city like I did when I was a young guy. But you know this is what I'm trying to say is that I saw on the news that in the city, the number of homeless people in the city has doubled since I had my problems, right? And I think this is like, it's not, I think I was very much, I didn't have friends around. I was walking down the street with all this bad shit around and intuiting that there's all this bad shit that is around in the slums in the downtown east side, intuiting that it's not going to get any better, and intuiting that I'm not doing very well in the situation and I don't want to get sucked into that, and then looking at what happened, and the thing is just doubled. It's like it's twice as much bad shit as there used to be. It's not getting any better at all. Nothing's like, and so, okay, maybe, I don't know, for people, I'm not against problem solving, I'm not against fixing, right? But like, what are you gonna do? I don't know. And then, so then this is the thing, is this Canadian Thanksgiving. Like, what, I don't know. What the fuck are you gonna do about like the double homeless explosion? The double population of the homeless people? Or the unhoused people, if you want to use that word instead, right? And I don't know, I feel really conflicted about this because I care about this issue, but I also feel like completely unable, like, I don't know if I should go and volunteer in the downtown east side, or if I'm just like, I don't have thick enough skin for it, right? Like, that if I just, like, you have to desensitize yourself to all this shit going on if you live down there, right? And it's like, I think that's one of the things James Hillman said, is becomes part, like, why I don't even want to go live in Vancouver. I don't want to live in the city because I feel like everybody who lives down there becomes completely, they have to walk past so much pain and suffering just to walk down the street every day that you just become completely numbed out to it. And then you as yourself are a person being like, oh, I have a problem, but it's either look at basically all the human waste on the street, and then look at all the functional people who don't give a shit about, they don't give a shit about that. They're not going to give a shit about me. I don't even have that big of a problem. Nobody, but like, you're a privileged white guy. You've got all the resources in the world. No one gives a fuck if you are in a bad mood or something like that. Get a life, you loser. And that's so, you're like, oh, well, that's the atmosphere. Fuck that, right? And then so you then say you go back to your privileged parents' house where everybody has a Mercedes Benz and a BMW and a Tesla, and you don't know anybody's names, and everybody looks the other way when you walk down the street, and everybody avoids you because you must be some fuck up, right? Ugh. I'm sorry, but this is okay. This is a bit of the Mars. Expressing a bit of the eruptive Mars-Pluto thing, right? But this is on my mind. This is of what's coming up with this transit. This... Okay, well, I'm going to leave it at this. This is how I'm doing things. I'm not doing... This is what I've got to talk about, right? It may not be, I don't know. I may not be the same as every other new age, sensitive new age guy making a feel good astrology video, but like this, to me, this is what it's about, right? I'm trying to deliver what it's about, how it's showing up for me, because otherwise I'm just making stuff up, basically, right? And so, I don't know. It is what it is. Here you go. This is my astrology video for this difficult transit we're having, right? And one of the things to know is that, like, I have to say that when the moon is in aspect to Pluto and Mars, it's specific. You can really feel it, right? And then when the moon is in aspect to Venus and Jupiter, it's maybe a bit better, right? You've got a bit of a better vibe, a little bit, right? But I'm just saying that, like, you can these dynamics are temporary. They will shift. Things will change. It's not a permanent thing. So it's like being able to acknowledge the difficult stuff and to see that it's being set off by these transits is to put it to give it its kind of relative space, to being it's relative to this situation, that these feelings and these dynamics and this stuff is all coming up, right? Yeah, to give some perspective and yeah. So I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to talk about the difficult stuff and to put it into context with difficult. This is what it's all about, right? And I'm doing the best I can with it, and I'm not. I don't want to. I hopefully don't people. I've also been watching a bunch of videos of like. Not astrology videos, but like of people who do music stuff, and I can just tell that after 3 years of living through pandemic and all the circumstances we're all dealing with, I'm not the only one who's maybe dealing with some difficult emotions, dealing with some grief, dealing with some loneliness, and that it's like what the Buddhist said, right? That it's like if you're grieving the loss of a loved one, go around and ask everybody else if they've had to grieve the loss of a loved one, and you realize you're not alone, right? And then you can start having compassion for other people, and not to see yourself as just some person who's suffering in their own isolated. So it's just me. I'm the only one suffering. You can say that there's lots of people having problems with stuff, right? And then that is a step towards compassion. Right? But you don't get there by just being in denial about it. You don't get there by just trying to focus on kitsch, right? That everything's sunshine and rainbows, and we're not going to talk about what doesn't. We're only going to talk about nice things and what makes us feel good and what comforts us. Because I don't know. I'm just like, in terms of living in a situation where there's obviously some unprocessed grief, even 10 years after the fact, that my dad, I don't think it just goes away by trying to just focus on all the nice stuff, right? But there's also this kind of thing that, like, I can't, I have this frustration of feeling helpless about it, because what am I supposed to do, right? What am I, like, I can't do anything about it, right? And that's, maybe that's disempowering, or maybe it's just better to realize that it's not something that I have the capacity to. I can't make that better for anybody else. I can only do it for myself. So in some way, the individualistic thing does make sense, right? I think so, anyways. But I think at the same time, though, is that like more and more millennials, I don't think have as much connection with their. It's like, it's either what are you like, you get stuck living with your family your whole life, or else people split off and they just like are completely alienated from their family. Like, my family's toxic, I don't talk to them, right? And I don't like, is either of those options really any good, right? Like, I don't know. They kind of seem like they both have problems to me, right? I don't know. This is just. I don't know. I kind of have this feeling at the end of this, like, have I said too much? Am I going to regret? But this, at least by making these videos, at least I have an outlet to sort of express this stuff and open up about some of these dynamics, right? And I don't know if other people find this helpful or not, or if I'm just throwing something out into the void. Or what, right? But this is what is coming up, anyways. I don't know. Anyways, this is a longer video. It's almost 50 minutes now. To all the Canadians out there, have a good Thanksgiving. I don't know if you're eating turkey today. Today is the day that I'm going to be eating turkey, and it's a rainy, gloomy Thanksgiving, but I will enjoy some turkey and try to enjoy the time with my family, despite whatever problems there are, right? Okay, thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.